This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for Cultural Competency 101. I'm Melanie Jackman with Montgomery County Women's Center. We're hosting this event today, and our presenter is Irfana Hussain from Daya, Houston. Irfana, are you on?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. There you are. Hi. The chat function is live, so you can go ahead and introduce yourself in the comments if you would like. Irfana is going to be asking a couple of questions, so make sure that you're answering in the chat, and her and I will be monitoring throughout the presentation. So Irfana, if you'd like, you can go ahead and take it away.
Sure, thanks, Melanie. Good morning, everybody. This is all still a little new to me, so I'm gonna do my best to interact with you using the chat function. I will be asking questions, and I would really appreciate your response, so that way we can make it a little bit more interactive instead of just me kind of talking out into the internet and you guys listening on the other end. But thank you for sharing all of your introductions. I can see a lot of people that I'm familiar with from some of our sister organizations in Houston that we partner with. So I'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Irfana Hussain, and I'm the Director of Outreach and Volunteer Programs at Daya. A part of what I do in the community is provide education and training to our other service providers, to the South Asian community, and also provide events where we can have more nuanced, in-depth discussions around domestic violence and the South Asian community. So today our discussion is all about cultural competency. This is an introductory training, and that's why I've called it Cultural Competency 101. Let me see if I can change these slides. Okay. So today's discussion, we're going to be able to understand how to define cultural and cultural competency, be able to identify the 6 stages of cultural competency, and be able to identify the best practices for achieving that. And I will definitely welcome your questions towards the end, and I hope we can learn from each other. So before I get started, I wanted to give a little bit more information about the organization that I'm from and why we work on cultural competency as an organization, especially in working with other agencies and helping them to understand what that means. So Daya was founded in 1996 here in the Houston area. Daya is not an acronym. Many people often think it is, but it's actually a word from Sanskrit, which means compassion. And so basically our mission is to empower the South Asian survivors who are trying to break the cycle of domestic and sexual violence and reclaim their lives. Like I said, it was started in 1996, and it was really started by a group of Indian American women here in the Houston area who really realized and had the foresight to understand that there are many cultural barriers that an immigrant community like the South Asian community would be facing. And oftentimes mainstream domestic violence agencies, as they were still kind of increasing their capacities in the 90s, that they might not have the training or the understanding or the personnel to deal with domestic violence as it relates to an immigrant community, a cultural community. And at that time, the community was still relatively small, but it was growing. And just as we have domestic violence in our mainstream community, for South Asian survivors, that existed, but there were many barriers that prevented them from seeking help. And in 1996, there was a case of a woman who was getting help from an agency. She was South Asian, but for whatever reason, she lost hope, and she ended up killing her whole family, her abuser, her children, herself. And it was a huge wake-up call to the community, and for that reason, this Daya was founded, and we continue to provide those services, which I'll go over in a little bit. But basically, our foundation of what makes us unique is that we provide culturally specific and trauma-informed services. As all domestic violence agencies, we do focus on the trauma-informed services. And it was important for us to align ourselves with the domestic violence movement and to really educate the South Asian community about what trauma-informed care and services means. Because again, there were a lot of cultural stigmas and taboos or denial that domestic violence even exists in the South Asian community. We focus on addressing the barriers that our community face, and these barriers can look that they can be culturally specific, but they can also be larger barriers that everyone who are either immigrants or people who are disenfranchised or a lower socioeconomic status might be facing, such as policy changes, access to resources, natural disasters like our pandemic that we're having. So we really focus on how are those affecting our population and what kind of response should we have. And then we empower individuals and community. We empower our individual, again, for many clients that come to us, there is an education that we do with our case management, helping them to understand what domestic violence is, what the cycle of abuse is, the forms of abuse. Oftentimes, they might minimize or deny that a certain type of abuse is there because they don't understand that it can be, for example, marital rape. So we empower individuals by helping them to be educated, to help them to understand their choices, so that way they can make their decisions that are right for them. And then empowering the community. So we do a lot of work with our South Asian community here in the Houston area. Through our events, through booths that we do in the community, like at community festivals. And really it allows us to just spread awareness and then empower the community to help address this. You know, what are the challenges that we're facing as a community? Where are our resources? Where are we, our priorities as a community? And for many, you know, they will often think that this is not affecting the community at the same level as it, you know, sort of perceptions of that domestic violence might affect other communities, not like ours, in different ways. And so, for example, with immigration abuse, oftentimes, you know, with a lot of immigration policies, there's a tendency that it affects one community at a higher proportion than another, but that's not the case. For example, there's a lot of talk about Hispanic immigrants, but not a whole lot of talk about South Asian immigrants in terms of policies and the barriers that they would face and the ramifications of policies for survivors of domestic violence. So these conversations are not happening in the South Asian community, and we're working to educate them on that. So again, the unique challenges that South Asian survivors face include cultural barriers. So again, denial, minimizing, thinking that there's a lot of shame and stigma in reporting to the police and seeking help. Divorce is often a taboo in South Asian communities, even if it's allowed. So for certain communities, divorce might be allowed, but there's still a taboo to it, right? Language barriers, you know, for any immigrant community, somebody who is foreign born or coming from another country, language is a huge barrier. So we try to overcome that by offering various South Asian languages that we can provide services and counseling in. Financial barriers for any victim of domestic violence, obviously financial barriers exist, but for South Asian communities, there's a lot of financial barriers related to how people might come here on visas. So for example, a spouse would come here on with a work permit and a visa, allowing them to work at a company here in Houston, and they bring their spouse with them, but the spouse does not have a work permit. She is dependent on him to be documented through their marriage. Now, if she wanted to leave because of abuse, she wouldn't have the ability to work. So that, you know, the way the policy works in terms of immigration for that for this scenario, there is a huge financial barrier that would prevent her from leaving, as well as immigration policy in terms of being documented and undocumented. Isolation, obviously, with any immigrant community, and again, in a city like Houston, isolation can be compounded because of the lack of transportation. So if you are living in an outlying suburb, you know, think about somewhere like Richmond or up in the Woodlands, and in these big communities, how would you seek help? How would you get to a police station if you didn't know how to, you know, call or didn't have access to a phone? just because we don't have public transportation in many of these areas. And so not only are new immigrants isolated because they don't understand the culture or they're new, but then they also don't have means to overcome that isolation because of transportation. There's lack of trust in systems or groups outside of their immediate community. And many of this can be historical and from their own countries that they're coming from. Police and other service providers there might not be the same type of trust, right? Or the training or the response to domestic violence. And so for that, there's a lot of hesitancy in thinking like, am I going to get arrested? Am I going to get deported knowing that I'm undocumented? Will I be safe if I do report or ask for help? Will they really be able to help me? So these questions, for any survivor of abuse will be there. And then obviously for the immigrant, it will be compounded. Immigration barriers and immigration abuse, kind of mentioned a little bit about the spouse visa, but people come here on different visas, whether it's a green card, a work permit, a student visa to study here, and that can often jeopardize their ability to seek help because they don't want to lose out on that status, and that creates additional barriers. And this is, again, on a policy and systems level that oftentimes our hands are tied, right? We try our best as service providers to be able to overcome that. And then obviously representation and access to service would be another one. So representation, right? So if someone calls an agency and there is nobody that looks like them or speaks like them or understands their culture, they might feel hesitant to eventually, reach out and continue to seek services from that agency. They might feel like they're not heard or understood, and they might not be able to access all of the services that you would provide as an organization or a responder. So we do address all of these barriers, and basically at Daya, we do focus on the South Asian community. And the South Asian community are people who trace their lineage or are immigrating from or are from the diaspora of the country of India, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Afghanistan. This is all located in the southern part of Asia. Oftentimes, people will say Southeast Asian, meaning South Asia, but actually Southeast Asian would be countries of like Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and Philippines, and Malaysia, those countries. So we sometimes do get clients from other Asian American or Middle Eastern. We are able to provide them, but oftentimes, again, we're limited because there are barriers for them, such as language, that we're not able to provide. We serve women and men, adults 18 and over, and we don't have any stipulation on how long your service, how long you can access services at Daya. If you've experienced abuse in the past and have unresolved trauma from it, you can still call us and get services such as counseling from us, including if you grew up in an abusive household as a child or were sexually abused and now you're an adult, but you still want to get services because of the trauma that you've never been able to process. So our services include our confidential helpline, our crisis intervention that we'll do over the phone, long-term holistic case management, long-term mental health treatment. That includes, the trauma-informed counseling. We also do EMDR as part of that mental health counseling, assistance with safety planning, protective order, police reports. We provide legal consultation and then access to representation and financial assistance for some of that legal representation, transportation, childcare, and housing. We don't have a shelter or transitional home, but we're able to provide short-term rental assistance or help with getting qualified for rapid rehousing through the federally funded program that covers up to 12 months of rental assistance. So these are the services we provide as an organization. And I wanted to kind of give this overview so you have an understanding of how we are operating as an organization. And I might refer to a lot of these as I'm talking about the cultural competence part. Oh, I forgot one slide. Okay, so I already talked about the education and outreach that we do in the community. We provide, different types of events and film screenings, social media campaigns, including this. So that takes us to the next part of our discussion and the core of this presentation. And the first question that I will start off with is why culture, right? Why should we talk about it? Why does it matter? And definitely now in our society, we are talking about it more. There is more awareness around it than it was 20 years ago when our organization was founded. Obviously, culture matters because US is a country of immigrants, right? Especially in a city like Houston, which has a very diverse population. Some of the demographics that I noted down is that, and this might be based on some previous data, and a lot of this data will get updated after our census, right? We're in the midst of our census, and by next year, we'll see that things might have changed. But in the city of Houston, according to the city demographic breakdown, 25.1% are white, 22.4% are Black, 40.3% are Hispanic, 7% Asian, and 2% other. And out of all of this, 31% are foreign born. And so this statistic really paints a picture for us to understand that we are having people from many, many different backgrounds. They're all going to be coming in with their own understandings, their own ways of doing things, their own value systems and identities. And that can, be a part of how they respond to domestic violence, how they access services, and how they continue to, interact with us, with agencies like ours. So what is culture? There's three aspects of this definition. Often, I'm going to kind of talk about what culture is not in a little bit, but in terms of what is culture, it is a shared experiences or commonalities that have developed in relation to changing social and political context. So it's important to understand that these are developed, right? And they can be developing. So what someone's culture is can include race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, class, immigration, location, time. So all of these things can really help, can really shape what that individual's culture is going to be. And because all of these things are fluid, it's also important for us to know that culture is fluid. It is not just a set of characteristics for a specific group of people and that are kind of unchangeable. And oftentimes, we think that we can learn everything there is to know about a person's culture. And once we memorize those facts and those characteristics, now we're culturally competent. But that is not the case. It is very fluid, and culture can be shaped. So someone who comes in as an immigrant, what they consider their culture might be very different than after 30 years of living here in America, their culture will have changed. So to give an example for myself, my culture has changed over the years. So I immigrated here to the United States when I was 6 years old with my parents from India. Now, growing up, what I considered who I was and what my culture is very different from now because I've expanded that. My experiences have kind of helped me to reshape and rethink what I want to retain as part of my culture and what I want to let go. So, I'm also a Texan, right? So I've taken on many characteristics of what it means and identifying myself as a Houstonian, as a Texan, as a female, as someone who is, working in this field. I might have certain political changes that have happened as I've grown up as an adult. So all of these kind of point to how culture can be a very fluid thing, and it's very important for us to kind of continue keeping that in mind, especially when we're talking about cultural identity. So cultural identity refers to the way in which a person defines their self, and it's important to know that the cultural identity that someone has is up to them to decide what they identify with, right? We can't say like, oh, this is who you are because these are the characteristics I can either see or you've kind of shared with me. And because then there's a lot of assumption in that part. It is based on person's unique set of experiences and it might contain contradictory elements. So one of the things that I kind of wanted, I always do with my audience is try to understand like, what are your identities? And you can put that in the chat, right? Like, how do you identify yourself? And you can have multiple identities, but I would like to see what some of those cultural identities would be in our audience today. So I'm going to give you guys about a minute to kind of start typing into the chat box, and then I can kind of see that, and I'll be able to share some of that. And the ones that I have listed for myself, I identify as a Houstonian. I identify as a Texan. I identify as an Asian American. I also identify as an Indian American. I also identify as a Muslim American. Um, I, I identify as a feminist, and um, uh, probably have more identities out there. Yeah, I see Melanie, American feminist, advocate, Cali Texan. I love that. Cali Texan, right? Indo-Caribbean. That's really good. Yeah, I love Tiffany's saying that one of our identities is she's cisgender, and the ways that we put what our identities are really also is part of what our experiences and our values are, right? The terminology that we use. So certain people might say I'm South Asian American, and others might say I'm Asian American. Again, it depends on what they're relating themselves to. And I've seen that within our community that certain people, they are very saying, no, I'm not South Asian American, because they don't want to be part of this more pan identity, but they want to retain their unique identity. And they'll be very adamant and say, I am Indian American. My family's from India. I have Indian culture and Indian values. And they'll be very specific about that. Same with the terminology like African American or Black or person of color. People might identify with all three or just one of them. And so again, that identity is part of how we express ourselves, and it is it is an agency that we have as individuals. It can't be put on us. First generation, I like that. That's a identity that many people have, right? That you're a first generation immigrant. Mixed race, we're seeing more of that too. And I'm really interested in seeing how the ways that people will be writing out their identities or their race or ethnicity on the census. Because again, there's this very narrow window or narrow option that the US government gives us for identifying, for taking off like what our identity is, our cultural or ethnicity is. But then they do give us an option to write other and expand upon it. And so, we'll probably be seeing a lot more of that for this decade, because there's been tremendous changes in the ways that people are talking about, and the ways that people mixed races and just different ethnicities with the changes in population. Awesome, thank you for sharing all of that. So again, all of this illustrates that we are very diverse, and we can wear many identities, and all our identities can be fluid. Someone who identifies as one, for example, in political, that those things can change, right? So culture is not, and it's important for us to really, again, kind of take this in, that it's not a pattern of beliefs, values, thoughts, and practices that define a group of people. We often think that that's what it is, right? That these are all the beliefs, these are all the values, and we can actually just enumerate them and then say that this is what your culture is. And it's not static. And we often think of culture in this way because it's the way it's taught to us in school. I mean, when I think back to when I was in school and we're, in our world history classes and in our cultural studies classes, part of how we understood culture was that each chapter we would have a different group of region of the world, and we would kind of understand some of the characteristics. And obviously, you can't go into all of the in-depth things, but growing up, that's how we're kind of taught to understand and study cultures and things like that. But what that does when we do that is that it leads to stereotypes, right? And so stereotypes is a set of attributes ascribed to a person, to a group, and imputed to its individual members simply because they belong to that group. So again, if I'm part of an Asian American community, because South Asian Americans are part of that community, it's sort of like a subcategory, right? Now, there'll be certain characteristics or stereotypes that might exist for an Asian American community, such as, oh, they're a model minority, which is actually a myth, but that idea exists that Asian Americans are model minorities, that they work in certain type of industries, specifically like IT or medicine or engineering, that they are really smart, or they're, these type of attributes might exist because maybe there was a certain percentage of people, or for whatever reason, that type of those type of values were ascribed to them in some context, right? But when they become a totality of what that group is, for anyone that doesn't fit it, they are often on the losing end. So when we say that an Asian American community is a model minority, they earn well, they don't need as many resources. So our resources that we do have for those that are, that don't meet those characteristics, we might not have the cultural competent resources directed towards that community. So to kind of clarify that a little bit more, we have a community called the Burmese community. They're from Burma, and many of them came to Houston as refugees. And many of them grew up in refugee camps for decades and decades, which meant that many of them did not have education or ability to work or the skills to work. When many of them were brought here to Houston, resettled here through the refugee process, they all kind of concentrated in one area. Now, technically, they are Asian American, but they don't have the education level, they don't have the language, they don't have the access to resources, and their immigration is very different than what we ascribe the Asian American community to be. For example, that the Asian American communities, that many of them come here on professional visas, they come here as students with higher education, PhDs and MDs and things like that. But here we have a population that's pretty significant within the Asian American population, but now they've become silenced because they don't meet those characteristics. And so when we then try to make services for Asian American communities, we might be making it for people that where it's not taking into consideration the characteristic of the Burmese population and the Burmese community. And so in that way, when we do ascribe these type of stereotypes, we do tend to then erase groups of individuals and unique people with different experiences within that larger community. But again, it is a part of how we operate psychologically. But it is a very human thing to have a stereotype. So when you see somebody like me, it's very like, I wouldn't say like, oh, why are you doing that? I understand that, right? Like, you're gonna see me and you're gonna think, oh, she's, oh, she has her skin color is kind of, brown. So what is she? Is she Hispanic? Is she a South Asian? Her name Hussain, oh, that that sounds familiar to me. So you're going to try to pinpoint where I am and who I'm from and who I could be, and your interaction with me. And again, that's very part of being human. But we can avoid that by checking in our biases and our prejudice and our stereotypes, and we can check that in by educating ourselves. And we can understand that there are different ways that we ascribe these stereotypes, and understanding those nuances of the stereotypes can help us to understand, like, what kind of stereotyping am I doing? So there are two categories of stereotypes that if you've kind of taken a cultural or bias class, that you might have gone over this. One is descriptive and the other is prescriptive. So descriptive stereotypes basically they tell how most people in the group supposedly behave, what they allegedly prefer, and where their competence supposedly lies. While prescriptive stereotypes tell how certain people should think, feel, and behave. So an example of this would be, for a descriptive, is that we might have a stereotype as women and female that we're natural caregivers, right? That's a very common stereotype. We don't ascribe that same type of characteristic to men, especially to the same degree. That might be changing a little bit in our American society and culture, but for the most part, women are cultural caregivers. That's not necessarily a bad stereotype. Oops, I accidentally changed this. But it can inform, again, how we do stereotype and identify somebody. The prescriptive example would be that if we think women are natural caregivers, then we might think that women should be the primary caregivers of children, implies that their primary duty should be to take care of children, and then this has our long-term impact on how we view women who work and how they're treated, right? So these, the implications of the stereotypes can continue on how we react to somebody, how we interact with them, what services or resources we offer to them, and again, how we see somebody. I mean, not too long ago here in America, with segregation and discrimination, we as a community would ascribe that, right? If you saw somebody, and to some degree, it's continuing to operate like the stereotypes, right? So we might think that a certain community and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I'm kind of stating what some of the common stereotypes and ideas that float around and are part of our society. For example, for many people, they might think, oh, they're African Americans have larger rates of incarceration, right? Because when you look at the number of people in terms of breakdown in jails, there's larger percentage of African Americans. Now, having that information in our mind, it also helps us to solidify and put into place that, oh yeah, so that means that group of people are more prone to be criminal. Now, if we we ascribe that to that community, then our interaction is going to be that we're going to be a little, wary, like, oh, is this person, are they, about to commit a crime, right? Like, are their actions going to point to that? And we get anecdotes from people from that community where they'll say like, oh, I was stopped and I didn't know, but it's because of the color of my skin or the way I was dressed, or that the person automatically assumed that I was going to do something bad in that situation. And so those implications are long, really the interactions of that has a long-term impact, right? And so when we do stereotype somebody and when we automatically look at somebody and we put in the descriptive and then we continue with that thought process of the prescriptive stereotype, it's the stereotypes kind of fit in, and then we just decide and make a decision whether the way you're going to interact, what you're going to offer or not offer. So I wanted to explore this a little bit more with you guys as well about how, what are some other descriptive and prescriptive stereotypes that we might hold or that you've heard about, right? In your field of work, in your own experience in the community that you're in. And I would appreciate if you guys could chat with me about that. So what's an example of a descriptive stereotype that you might have heard of, and then what are some of the prescriptive stereotypes that you might have heard of as well? Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, victims of DV are weak, quiet. Yeah, Black women are angry. Yeah, that one's something that we've been discussing with other you know, with other cultural communities about these stereotypes. Hmm. Yeah, these are all very true. You know, I've heard them, or I've heard other people kind of ascribe that to other. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Immigrants steal jobs, Mexicans steal jobs, right? Yeah, the way you speak with an accent. Absolutely right. You know, with the accent part, that reminds me of, um, you know, I've seen many people, like from my own family and community, been questioned as to how we learn to speak English so well, right? Um, and that might be coming, they might think like, oh, they're just asking a question, but it can come off as racist or, you know, it's obviously coming from a place of a stereotype that a person with that skin color from that country couldn't speak English so good. Exactly. How is your English so good, or how did you learn to speak English so well, right? Without an accent. I've seen that in the South Asian community because oftentimes people are coming from, you know, many South Asian countries like India and Pakistan were colonized by the British, and their English is a common language there, and many people learn it and speak it, and they go to British school or convent schools where English is taught with a certain accent that you know, we are kind of, we might feel strange, like if you didn't know all of that, you might think like, well, how did that person learn to speak in this British way? They're not British, they don't look it. And, you know, you might assume that someone with a certain skin color would speak in a certain way. Men do a better job in the corporate world, exactly. Yeah, and then and then the prescriptive ways that, you know, if we have that stereotype that men do a better job in the corporate world than women, they have to work harder to be able to get the same position, the same pay, and then they're not hired at the same rate. And then there's an assumption that it will take them longer to learn that type of, you know, to get that raise or job title change. Perfect. Thank you for sharing all of that. Oh, there's one that I just saw right now. All white people are racist. Yeah, that is a stereotype. You know, people will think that, you know, just because you're a certain, you already will have that type of racism embedded in you, but that's not the case, right? So culture shapes many things. So for example, an individual's experience of violence, right? People coming from patriarchal societies where there are certain types of gender roles that are part of that culture, the ways that you know, you speak, the way to, you know, to elders, you know, with in terms of age, how the community structure, how families are structured, all of that individual's experience of that, how they grew up will shape their experience of how they respond to violence and how they understand what violence is in terms of domestic violence. It also shapes whether that perpetrator will accept responsibility or not. So here in America, until, you know, the 80s and 90s, when laws were passed against domestic violence, there was a culture that said that, you know, it was okay for men to discipline their wives, right? For husbands to discipline their wives, and that if they did have a dispute that they needed to take care of on their own, and there really weren't any resources or accountability or responsibility, and a lot of that, there was a lot of victim blaming as well. that's changed over time here in America. It's taken some time, but it wasn't too long ago, right? It wasn't until the 90s that we had a Violence Against Women's Act passed. And so that culture, the way that we have in our society and where people might be coming from will really shape how a perpetrator is going to accept that responsibility. The culture is also going to shape whether services are equally accessible to all. So, again, with the language, with the ways that we trust systems, the way we understand who can help us and cannot help us because of the way we interact and the values that we might ascribe to one another and to ourselves, that's going to shape how we're going to access that service, right? And then it's also going to shape our own responses within the culture, excuse me, within the culture of the systems and organizations in which we work. For example, we have our own assumptions that as advocates and as service providers that we're operating with, we have large caseloads and things like that as well. And that can often, the way we respond, we might be asking questions like, why didn't you report? Why didn't you make a police report? I don't understand why you're not following this. And that might be based upon what our cultural system is, but then we're kind of putting that onto that person who's coming to and seeking services from us. Culture shaping perpetrator accepting responsibility. Culture can also shape the way the community responds to intervention and acceptance of that responsibility, right? So, for example, a few years ago in the South Asian community here in Houston, mostly in the Indian American community, there was a case of someone that was a little bit high profile in terms of his standing in the community, and he was charged with child sexual assault to a minor. She was a high school age girl, and he eventually pled guilty. And with that came that he couldn't be around children, and he served some jail time, and other things that came along with that. Now, when this became news within the community and it was published in the local community paper and talked about on social media and on the website, the conversations and the ways that people accepted or this person's act really, again, brought out sort of how our culture is shaping the ways that we are understanding violence and who is victim, who's a perpetrator, and what the responsibility should be on as a community and what the accountability should be. And so for many people, they said, well, he accepted the guilty plea, he served the sentence or what the law required, and so now we should kind of forgive him and continue. Other people really wanted to excommunicate him out of the community and say, we don't want to ever do business with him. He's not allowed to continue doing what he's doing. He works in the media industry. So, with the radio show and cultural programs and things like that, we're going to completely boycott it. We have to accept responsibility. We have to be harsh on. And so there were both type of views coming in conversation from the Indian American community. And so again, that really shows that culture can be different, right? For some people, they have more of an understanding that violence is not acceptable. This type of violence is not acceptable. While others think that it's okay as long, they serve their sentence, and we can really, people make mistakes, right? And this person's like apologize and they're gonna move past it. And to this day, this person has slowly come back into the public sphere in the community, and I'm not sure like how he's able to do that, especially because there is if he's labeled a sexual offender, and with that you can't be around children and things like that. But people have given his company sponsorship again and are working with him and promoting it, and he's there, his name is there. And really that comes from the way that community's culture shaped the response to that form of violence and the form of responsibility they were going to take. So it was very different. It was very interesting to kind of see that played out as I was working at Daya. I just started and this kind of came about. So, you know, it can vary. And just like in our American society, larger society, that response is going to be different. So this takes us to understanding what cultural competence means and what the definition is. So we kind of talked about how culture is important, what are identities, what it shapes, and so how do we as a society, as groups of people, as providers, become more culturally competent? So cultural competence refers to a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and practices that come together in a system, agency, or professional setting that enables that unit to work effectively in interactions with populations whose cultures or language is different. Kind of a mouthful, but basically it helps us to understand that it has behaviors, attitudes, and practices, and it's a way that we work with interacting with one another, with people that are different than us. And the most important part of understanding what cultural competency is and achieving it is that it is a process. So in order to become a culturally competent person, there is not one time where you can say, I'm done, I'm culturally competent, I don't need to learn anymore. But it's important to know that achieving cultural competency is a process, and there are different stages to it. And so this diagram that I have up here helps us to understand what those stages are. We all want to have cultural proficiency, and by understanding these different stages, it allows us to see where we are as a group or as an agency and where we want to be. And I'm going to kind of go over each of these at this point, and also after this, I'm going to ask to kind of, as I'm kind of talking for you to think where your agency or where you might be in terms of the stages of cultural competency. So the first stage that I have here in red, cultural destructiveness. This is the most extreme end of it, right? These are the attitudes, policies, and practices that are destructive to other cultures. It's dehumanizing of other people, and there's assumption of superiority, that certain groups are superior to others, that certain genders are superior to others, whatever you want to kind of put in there, that group is superior to that. At one point, part of our society here in America was culturally destructive, right? Segregation, discrimination based on skin color, based on gender. Women didn't have the same rights. If you were a victim of domestic violence, you were not believed. You were assumed that you played a part in it, right? And so a lot of this cultural destructiveness, parts of it can continue to operate in our society in certain bubbles, in certain places. And it's very important for us to kind of, pinpoint what those, what are those attitudes, policies, and behavior that is contributing to that destructive competency, I guess. The second stage gets a little bit better, cultural incapacity, which this includes unintentional cultural destructiveness, bias, ignorance, and or fear. So you might not be intending to do it, but you haven't educated yourself or kind of taken in the information that would allow you to overcome that bias and ignorance and or fear. This continues to operate in our society to a certain degree as well. An example of that would be, with after 9/11, there was a lot of fear around who the Muslim community was. And so you would potentially, with kind of taking that in, associating certain images of terrorism acts and images that you might see in movies, that those stereotypes and biases kind of come inside of us, and we kind of hold on to it. And so we might unintentionally bring those out because we haven't checked in those biases yet. We haven't really educated ourselves and tried to overcome and see whether are those real or not. And this ignorance, fear, and bias can be destructive for an agency, because then you might not welcome someone in from that culture or from that group, and think that that person is going to do something, or they're eventually going to lead to that, right? So this again exists within our society. We haven't 100% overcome this yet. Cultural blindness, again, we're improving as we go from each stage to the next. This involves the policy of being unbiased, belief that culture, class, or color makes no difference. This stage of competency is often well-intentioned, but it's very ethnocentric. So basically you're saying, I don't see class, I don't see color, I don't see culture, everyone's the same, I'm gonna treat everybody the same. And while that might be coming from a place where you're like, I just don't wanna deal with these complexities, and I'm just gonna assume and say, here's my protocol as an agency that I have, and you better follow all of this. And if you don't know English, you better learn it, or you better just, these are the rules, this is the way you operate, and I don't see who you are and where you're coming from and your experience and things like that. There can be a good, obviously there's good intentions because you're trying to like level the playing field, but then you are creating barriers for people in seeking services. Now, if you say that I don't believe in class or color, doesn't make a difference to me, then you're saying that, well, why can't you get a job, right? Then you might not have those services that would allow people to become economically well off over time, or that they can access the same resources in the same way. So again, cultural blindness can lead to creating barriers, even though the ways that we're operating might be well-intentioned. The next level is cultural sensitivity. And this is the realization of weakness and gaps that are missing in working with other cultures. There's a desire for inclusion, there's a commitment to civil rights, there's an implementation of trainings, and there's within that group and agency, but there's a danger or sense of false accomplishment or tokenism. So, when we're looking at like the corporate world, we'll see that there's a lot of talk about cultural sensitivity training and cultural sensitivity day and cultural day. And you are definitely realizing that, hey, we haven't been like really recognizing that there are different people from different cultures and backgrounds. How about we highlight those, and then our once a year cultural day or once a year cultural competency is going to basically address that, and now we're culturally competent and we don't have to worry about anything else, right? And what that ends up doing is that you're not really looking at the thing that, are there the same percentage of people in from like one cultural group, let's say, Hispanic Americans, are they at the, at the top levels of the company? What levels are there? What are their access to improving themselves or growing professionally, or where they're hired or not hired? Is your company hiring people from different backgrounds? Are they hiring people for different genders or sexual orientation? Might not be, right? It might just be like, oh, here's our token, someone from the LGBT community, here's our token person who's the female, here's the African American, here's Hispanic. And so again, there's a lot of tokenism, and then that person has the burden of representing that group and then kind of teaching the rest of the people about it, which is not fair. But the cultural sensitivity stage can really, while again well-intentioned and wanting to improve, can be somewhat just counterproductive for achieving that cultural competency. The next part is cultural competence, and this is the acceptance and respect for differences, the continual inquiry about other cultures, the expansion of knowledge, and the hiring of diverse staff. Now, this is where we are hoping that many people are already working towards becoming, or are already kind of there. So again, you are respecting other people. You constantly assess where your organization or your group is in terms of how we're interacting with other groups, how we are providing our services, and how we are hiring, or the resources that we're creating. As a culturally competent organization at Daya, we do that. Over the 2 decades, we've changed our services to help meet that. Our legal services didn't exist at the beginning, but we realized how many of our clients really needed that because all of our cases involve some form of legal need. And how were we going to continue helping them overcome the violence and overcome the barriers if we are not able to connect them to those type of resources, or at least create and help facilitate those resources for them. And so, we expanded our service as a result of that. Same with housing. We expanded our housing, and because we understood that housing was a crucial need for many of our clients, and it was a way for them to become safe and to figure out and what are their next steps they're going to take. So we're able to provide some of that rental assistance and a safe place to live until they're kind of understanding where they want to be next. And then the last step that we all want to achieve as an agency is cultural proficiency. Oftentimes we can't always get to cultural proficiency. Our goal should be that we want to become culturally competent in the hopes that we can be a proficient organization. And basically what it means to be proficient is that cultures are held in high esteem, responsibilities taken for constant development of new knowledge and approaches to interaction. It assumes responsibility to transfer skills to others. Cultural competence is advocated with all systems and organizations. And basically what you're doing here is that you understand how important culture is, right? That everyone that's coming to you understand, and you internally investigate and say, why is there a increase in this group in terms of them coming to us for help? Why there's been a drastic increase in it, and what is it that we're doing differently? Are we able to properly serve them in the same way that we're serving other groups? Do we have the language? Do we have the personnel that are trained to be able to deal with the increase in number of this group that might have specific needs, right? And so when you, as a proficient organization, you want to make sure that you continually have that. So, with many of our agencies, there can be a high turnover, right? And you hire another person and they kind of start over again, and they might not be at the same training level, and it might be another year before they actually attend a cultural competency training or understand how the ways that the agency's values are. And so as an agency, you can take that responsibility to make sure that you're able to, as each of your staff are coming in, you're able to transfer those skills to them in ways that make sense for them. They're able to then provide those services at the same level that you would expect everyone, whether you've been there for 5 years or you just arrived there as a new person. That the values that you share is understood by all across the board, right? That cultural competency is advocated with everyone. And then to even increase this, that as agencies that we work with each other to make sure we are on the same page with that, right? Because then we can help to really work together in a way that we can address domestic violence kind of on the same page and at the same level. Obviously, this takes a lot more resources, a lot more training, a lot more time, which oftentimes we don't have. We are limited in our resources as nonprofit organizations, but it's something to strive towards. And that's the important part of understanding the process of cultural competency and the stages of it. That it is a process. It's important for us to understand where are we as an agency, and as we're growing, where do we want to be? How do we achieve the mission of eradicating domestic violence for all people, right? And will we be able to do that in the ways that we're operating currently? So these questions are part of this internal process. And so I'm hoping that you guys are kind of, as I've been talking through all of the stages, you've been kind of thinking yourself, where is my agency kind of at the moment? And I wanted to kind of just get a feel of how people are kind of understanding their own agency. So I want to take a minute here to kind of hear from you. where do you think, as the one employee that there might not be many of you here from your agency, maybe you're the only one, from your understanding and your interactions, where is your agency in terms of cultural competency? Are you at the cultural destructiveness? Are you at cultural incapacity, cultural blindness, cultural sensitivity, cultural competence, or cultural proficiency? Or are you in the middle of two of them? That's another possibility, right? Again, these aren't as stuck in, as static, and you might be in the process of moving from one to the other. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a minute to hear from you about where you're at as an agency. So between cultural sensitivity and competence, yeah, I'm seeing that. And that probably is a reflection of where we are, right? For many of us, we might be in the space where we are understanding more where our limitations are, and we do want to change, right? There's already a desire to change and a desire to understand how we can better provide services. And then part of achieving cultural competency, sometimes staff really want to make those changes, but maybe the board is not there yet, right? Oftentimes our organizations might be overseen by board of directors that don't have the same level of training or the same level of competency, and they might not think that this is important and might not make, the help with making those changes. And so that's something to address as an agency in thinking through that when you have agency-wide trainings or strategic planning, is there ability for board of directors and advisory boards to be able to go through this training, and where there's input from the staff in the challenges that they're seeing in the clients and where we're currently operating and things that are not working and where we kind of want to be. Yeah, having the resources to become culturally competent can be limiting, and sometimes those resources can also, even if you have it, might not be used for all, right? So you might think you might prioritize one group or one type of thing over another just because you're limited in the resources. This is all very great. So perfect. So again, to kind of recap cultural competency and domestic violence, it's important for us to understand and have the baseline kind of assumption that domestic violence occurs in every community, right? We know that as those that are working in this field, that it's not that one group is going to have more domestic violence versus another one, or that it doesn't exist in this group. And having that assumption is very important for kind of moving towards that cultural competency. Culture can't and should not be used as an excuse for violence. This might seem very like, oh, obviously, but again, our cultural biases can often prevent us from understanding this nuance. We will often ascribe cultural practices or cultural norms as the default and say that this person is behaving the way that they are because it is embedded within their culture. And so again, we can't excuse that violence. And in American society, we often did excuse that violence, right? Before the domestic violence movement really took off, men doing that, it's okay. It's part of marriage. It's, it's not really violence. it's a private matter between those two individuals. And so that can continue on even today when we think that a person who is from a specific group. So, we had an incident where we were dealing with where a sheriff, and I'm not going to name the county, had come out to a call and did not provide any type of translation service to the victim who didn't really speak English. And that officer assumed that this was part of our culture and said, you guys need to figure this out yourself, and used the spouse who was the abuser to translate to the victim. And she wanted to flee and she wanted to go to shelter, and he didn't offer any type of ability to access that resource by giving her like the numbers to call, or that he would help her call her, or anything like that. And so there was an assumption that that violence is excusable because it's embedded within your culture, or the ways that husbands and wife are supposed, their interactions and what's allowed in that. And so, that assumption that's there came, the manifestation of it was very negative for that one person, and she couldn't access the resources. Her life was put in danger. She was already being physically abused, and now she couldn't flee even though she had called. And now she's probably not going to call again, right? Because she's going to think that I might get arrested because for whatever reason that I'm going to get blamed for calling and having a disturbance or something like that. And so again, so cultural can't should not be used as an excuse for violence. And then cultures will have contradictory views of violence. The example I gave for the Indian American community with the sexual offender, there were contradictory views of what was accepted or not. Within cultures, Asian Americans will esteem family and protecting your family and taking care of your family and being part of a family as a high value. But at the same time, if there's violence within it, trying to get help or something like that might not be accepted because, while there's a preservation of family, there's also this that we keep things within the family in this way. And so, you could hold somebody in esteem, but continue to be violent against them. And it's very important for us to kind of make that distinction that people will have these contradictory views of what violence is. With victims and survivors, you might have where someone might think that marital rape is not really violence, right? That there is no such thing as marital rape, and they might not disclose that as a form of sexual abuse that they're experiencing, and then they wouldn't get help on that either. And then, the advocate might not press or kind of ask questions in ways that they would be able to get the answer to that. So again, people will have these contradictory views. And so the importance, again, of cultural competency and of achieving and understanding where we are and working towards that competency and proficiencies to better serve everyone. At the end of the day, that's why it's important. It's not here to like make ourselves kind of feel better. Oh, I understand culture better. That's part of it, but it's really to remove those barriers and to open up access. And so that way we can achieve the mission that we're all working on, which is to stop domestic violence or to better serve the community, to, whatever that mission is for your agency. And achieving this process to better help, there are certain good best practices that you can bring in as an individual and then as groups. And one of them is obviously being aware of one's biases and prejudice, and understanding that as professionals, we have certain type of power and values that we might impose on who we're working with. Someone who's coming in as a survivor, they're already seeing you as a person of power. They're thinking that if they need to interact with you, maybe disclose, maybe not disclose certain things, because if you disclose certain things, maybe you might not get the help, right? All of the power kind of lies in your hands. And so understanding that you do have that power, and you have the power to really affect that change to that survivor, to that client, by checking in your biases and prejudice, by listening to the victims, and by asking certain things. asking certain questions that will help them in ways that are not prejudiced or biased. And going along that, this kind of reiterates that, understanding the barriers for victims, but building trust with diverse community is very important with achieving cultural competency. So what that would look like is is bringing in people from those communities, going out to those communities to be visible. So many different groups, especially in the South Asian community, they'll have festivals and community days and family days and things like that, right? We get a table and we have all the information. We're able to interact with that community. We're at the same events year after year after year. And it's important for that community to know that we are part of you, that we are here to listen to you, that we're trying to understand you, and we want to work with you. Then when we go out and interact with different communities in South Asian, very diverse, right? There's Muslims, there are Sikh, there are Hindus, there are Christians. They all have their own different values in the way they operate. So we reach out to them and we say, you know, we want to help you guys and we want to understand. And, you know, we see that this is an issue in your community. And would it be okay if we came out and did a presentation? We'd like to learn from you what you guys are experiencing as leaders in your community. Are you seeing instances of violence? Are you seeing instances where people are being victimized? What does that victimization look like? And so again, that's going to help us to see, are we making those resources available to them or not? Are we increasing that accessibility to that community or not? And so that's part of the process that we at Daya kind of work on. So I'll reach out to all of these different diverse South Asian groups, and we try to have materials in their languages, and we'll send the right person that we think would be able to kind of represent or interact with them a little bit more. And we'll go to like temples and mosques and churches. We'll go to community centers, and we'll go on radio shows that are part of that community. So there are a lot of radio shows in the South Asian community in different languages. And we'll just ask them like, hey, can we come on? And that host in that language can kind of talk about who we are, and we buy ad space. And all of that is building that trust. When we have that trust, that community will feel easy, it will feel more comforted that they can reach out to you, and then they can help you to understand what are the barriers that they're facing. And when you start understanding those barriers, you can then understand why the victims and the clients that are coming to you, why they're behaving in the ways that they are, right? Why are they, you might as an advocate feel like you have certain challenges with someone from a South Asian background, right? Well, why is it those challenges exist? And how can you turn that type of approach around in a way that would be more understandable and overcome that challenge? So again, this has a lot, there's a lot of work that you have to do within this, but it's all very crucial work. And I think part of why Melanie at Montgomery County Women's Center wanted to provide this is that, we really, as we're thinking through victim services, we really want to make sure that victims get help in the ways that is easy and that they can really heal. And as a cultural, as a diverse community, as a diverse city, we're going to have many different ways that we want to do that. And there's not one like right way of doing it, but the right way of doing it is that checking in our biases and that we are willing to understand what that community's needs and our barriers are. So that basically kind of concludes my presentation. I would definitely welcome questions from you all about Daya services, the barriers that different communities might face, how we can better work towards, what are some additional examples of best practices or anything that you might have additional clarification. So you can go ahead and start typing questions into the chat. Melanie, is there any other way we wanted to do questions?
I think that would be the easiest. I have a question for you though.
Sure.
So one of the questions that I get a lot in advocacy trainings, when we're doing advocacy trainings, is in regard to cultures that promote or make excuses for, or the violence is kind of embedded into their culture. How do we then talk to victims about what is abusive and what's not abusive when their culture tends to think that that type of behavior is okay?
Yeah. So, part of us understanding that there will be a lot of acceptance that, yeah, it's okay for this to have happened to me because that's what's accepted, right? Like that's part of our upbringing of what gendered roles are and what power roles are within a relationship. So we take the approach that, within how mainstream domestic violence is, that we educate that person that and reiterate that it's not their fault, that they don't have to take that blame. And trying to overcome that is going to take time, but we reiterate it as best as possible and over again, especially in the counseling part. So by us offering that counseling, we're able to continue working on that with the case management. So, the counseling will help, and the counseling that we offer, we do have one counselor who can do that in Hindi and Urdu, which is a major South Asian language. And she can really work with that person in helping them to understand the ways that they're phrasing and the terminology that they're using, and really why is it that they're blaming themselves, right? And so to give you an example with one case that we were dealing with, this woman, she was severely abused. The husband had prior convictions and he was eventually arrested. We helped her to get a protective order, but once the protective order came through, right after that, quickly, because of his prior convictions and charges, and him having an immigrant status, he was eventually put up for deportation, and that he wouldn't be able to continue staying in this country. All of a sudden, she felt like she was to blame for that. And we had to really talk her through that it was going to take her time to help, to kind of overcome that shocking news that he was going to be deported. He wouldn't have access to his children anymore. She has nobody here. She felt like the reason he was in that situation is because of the protective order, the steps that she took, the protective order that she got, her seeking help, and then now he's being deported. So there's a lot of self-blame in it, but we just reiterated over and over again that it wasn't. That why did you seek help in the first place? Because you were unsafe, because he hurt you, and you don't deserve that. And even if they do go back to the abuser, which we understand can be part of the process, we will continue to signal to them that we're here to help you. This is not your fault, and help them to understand that the community is here, right? So when volunteers kind of step in and provide some of that help and support, they're able to see that there is a community that's here to support them, and they don't have to continue living in that abusive situation. I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, specific questions to ask them, it really depends upon, how they're kind of reacting or the way they're acting. But again, reiterating those same messages is very important. It's not your fault. We believe you. You don't deserve this.
Yeah, and I think also, like, regardless of culture, a lot of times when it's verbal or emotional abuse or the sneakier forms, or the power and control dynamics, a lot of times what we revert to is, do you feel like you have a say in this relationship? Do you feel like you have the ability to change dynamics in the relationship? Can you talk to your partner about the fact that you don't want to have any more children, that maybe you didn't go to school previously, but now you really want to go to school, or that when you first got married, you were okay with the cultural idea that you didn't work, but now you want to work and you want to have your own money? Are you able to have those conversations within your relationship? And if not, why? Why don't you feel safe to have those conversations, and that everyone should feel like they are a partner in their relationship, and that just because I said, I agreed to a dynamic in my relationship 15 years ago when we first got together, or 5 years ago, or 5 months ago, regardless of culture or whatever, I should be able to come to my partner now and say, hey, I'm having these thoughts, or hey, what do you think about, or hey, I really want to have a job, or I want to go back to school, or I don't want to have any more children. I don't want to stay at home. And, we talk about how relationships are on a spectrum from like healthy to unhealthy and to abusive. And so the first couple times you bring up that conversation and get shut down by your partner, maybe that's not necessarily abusive, but it's definitely navigating in that unhealthy water. But that being shut down time and time again, and you agreed to this then, it doesn't matter what you want now, or I make the decisions, or you don't have a say, the more often that happens, the more we start navigating into that abusive territory, because there's no compromise in that relationship. They're not willing, and they don't care about your thoughts and your feelings, and how does that make you feel, is kind of how we describe it. Because a lot of cultures, and I think even I had a situation with my son and his girlfriend, and tracking, apps on their phones and knowing where each other was all the time and things like that. I may not agree with that dynamic, but they both agreed that that's what they wanted at that time. And then when one of them came up and said, I don't really think this is working for me anymore, how do you navigate that conversation? Do you shut that person down immediately and say, absolutely not, you already agreed to this, or accuse them of doing something wrong as to why they don't want that on their phone anymore? Or are you able to have a conversation and find a compromise and really dig into why that's not, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? And I feel like with culture, it's very similar, that there really is no black and white. The only black and white piece of it is, are you partners in that relationship? Are you willing to hear what your partner has to say, or do you just shut them down?
So. And many times, that for cultural reasons, that power dynamic might not be there. So you grew up thinking that you're not allowed to question your husband, right? For many, and we see that in the South Asian community, because they are coming from patriarchal communities where in-laws and the husband have more power and more say and the decision-making power. And so there's not the right to question that. Helping one of our survivors or our clients to overcome that understanding is going to take a while, because this is something that they've learned from as a child, right? So how do you begin to undo that all of a sudden? But all the stuff that you mentioned, Melanie, that's it's absolutely right. And when we start talking to them in the ways that can make sense to them without overwhelming them, because they're already overwhelmed, right? Like, hey, why is this happening to me? Whose fault is it? How should I respond? You want to make sure that you're constantly having that conversation and helping them to kind of think through one thing at a time. The example I gave you, that client, she was completely overwhelmed, right? She wanted to take her protective order back. She wanted to say like, oh, no, I'll go back, and the children won't have any access to their father anymore. But we really had to talk her through. And she constantly still feels overwhelmed, and she's getting counseling from us and things like that. But it's going to be a huge process, because she spent 30 years of her life understanding or learning this. And we also see a lot of in-law abuse. I didn't really mention that in my presentation, but within the South Asian community, there's also this understanding like, oh, once you get married, you also have to, kind of report to the in-laws, like their demands and what sort of like their decision-making power. And that can also be tricky for many of our clients who, now they have like multiple perpetrators who are after them and are asserting power and control. And so helping them to navigate how they don't have to give that power to their in-laws, and that it's okay to go against them, and helping them to kind of go through that process of understanding.
Awesome, great information. Well, I'm not seeing a ton of questions in the chat box. So I did put a link to the evaluation for the training in the chat. So if for those of you guys that are still on, you can copy and paste that into your browser and send it right away. Otherwise, I'll send it out with the replay link. And if you guys have any questions, feel free, you can reach out to Daya, or you can reach out to myself, and I can get you in contact with Irfana. But I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Irfana for the presentation. It was fantastic. And thank you to everybody else who joined us today. We had like 68 people on the call, so that's wonderful. Yeah, I'll be putting the replay link up on our YouTube channel and be sending it out. So please feel free to share it with other people at your agencies. Yeah, and we're hoping to continue the professional development series twice a month, starting in May. So be on the lookout for more training information. So we appreciate all of you guys. I'm seeing multiple names of people who are on almost every week. So thank you for your support. We really appreciate it.
Melanie, I think there's a question about how do we respond to in-law abuse, and I can address that quickly. So with in-law abuse, when somebody calls into our office, that question is part of our initial intake process. And so we ask that right away, so that way we know what their situation looks like. It's important for us to ask that question because we know there are higher rates of in-law abuse in the South Asian community. So that's one step that we're responding to it, right? And we're building it into the way we're doing our services. The second is that when we know that there's in-law abuse, we obviously do the follow-up questions as to like where they're at. Are they living with you? Are they on the where in relations to your space? And then we customize our safety plan according to that. So that way they can stay safe. If we know that they're in the same house as their abuser, as the in-laws who are also abusive, that this person's not there, if they want to flee, it's going to be that much harder. And we have to come up with creative ways and help them to figure out what is the best way they're going to be able to leave and come to safety. Oftentimes, there might not be a lot of evidence and that there is in-law abuse. And people will obviously deny it and say, we didn't know this abuse was going on. It was all him. But oftentimes it is sanctioned, or like people kind of turn away and pretend like it doesn't exist, even though they're aware of it. And so we, do the safety planning. We make sure that that person understands that abuse is abuse, right? The in-laws, and oftentimes many of them will be forthcoming to say, like, my mother-in-law threatened me with a knife. Or my father-in-law, doesn't allow me to go out, like he keeps tabs on me, or whatever. We've had instances where a sister or brother-in-laws have gone out and like beat up family members of the woman. So it can be pretty violent and unsafe, and so we really, extensive safety planning is key as long as you're in that. And then obviously helping them to understand that they can take out protective orders from against their in-laws. And we work closely with, like at Harris County DA's office, their liaison officer there, Leija Thomas, she's actually South Asian, and we have a good relationship where she helps us, help educate the client on how they can protect themselves from their abusers as well. So we're working on different spaces in that education and response level. Any questions for how to respond as a lawyer? I have an Indian client who was being abused by her husband-in-laws. Her mother-in-law even burned her face, but she was primarily afraid of the husband, but seemed to approve or control it. So obviously documentation is very important. If that person is seeking services, that advocate or agency should be providing the safety planning as much as possible. Again, working with systems, so working with the DA's office to making sure we get those protective orders or restraining orders, working with the victim to be able to get the documentation as much as possible, I think is very key in terms of legal. I can't say a whole lot more about the legal part because I don't have the training or background to really respond to that. But if you are having questions around that, you're welcome to call our office and speak to our Director of Legal Services, who has like 12 years of experience in working with lawyers and in-law abuse. So you can 713-981-7645 and ask for somebody that can kind of answer that question. All right, Brittany, thanks. I think if there's not many questions, Melanie, we can end it, or?
Looks like that is it.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great day,
All right.
everybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.